Video about the 2025 FRQs. And just a reminder, we are going to go over question 4 today, and each of these questions, numbers 3 through 6, are all questions that you should spend no more than 10 minutes on during the AP test. So I am going to give you guys a moment to read the background information, so that way you guys can understand what we're talking about. Just please pause the video while you're reading. All right, so here we're talking about basically evolution. And the question's asking us to describe the genetic evidence that evolution is occurring in a population. And ultimately, it's going to be a matter of allele frequencies or phenotype frequencies that are changing. That's kind of your ultimate proof that evolution is occurring. So you have two species that are separated, and when they're separated, they're going to accumulate genetic differences, and as they accumulate those genetic differences from each other, they'll eventually no longer be able to interbreed, and that's the point at which we'll consider them different species. So describe the genetic evidence that evolution is occurring. You could say something like, allele frequencies will change. Between parts of the population. Remember, this is a describe question, which means that you do need to write in a complete sentence, and you do need to give a little more detail. All right, so let's go ahead and let's look at the scoring guide for this. So there are a couple of different answers. You could say the easiest one, there are heritable changes in phenotype. That heritable is key because if the phenotype changes, but that change is not heritable, meaning it can't be passed on to the next generation, it's not going to count as natural selection or evolution. You could also say there are changes in allele or gene frequencies. Remember I said that's kind of your genetic hallmark that evolution has occurred. All right, let's look now at part B. Go ahead and pause the video now so that you can read what part B is asking. All right, so what they're talking about now is isolation. Specifically, this land barrier is a form of geographic isolation. And geographic isolation can lead to divergent evolution because when the two populations are physically separated from each other, because keep in mind, there was an isthmus that formed. So this would be the Pacific, and this would be the Caribbean. And if you're living in the ocean, even if there are rivers in this landmass that's fresh water, and the saltwater marine species could not cross over in order to interbreed. So you're basically, with a physical barrier like this, you are blocking gene flow. So you can say gene flow between populations is interrupted. And since this is an explain question, I would go into a little more detail. So gene flow between populations is interrupted, so genetic differences accumulate between the populations until they can't interbreed anymore, so they can no longer And if you wanted to be more certain, you could write something along the lines of, this would lead to speciation. So let's go ahead and let's look at the scoring guide. So there are a couple of different potential answers. It's saying selective pressures could result in different allele or gene frequencies. When it says selective pressures, that means there are differences in the environment that act as a pressure for natural selection and cause changes in allele frequencies, which cause changes in the population. You could say that the land barrier results in reproductive isolation, or that lack of gene flow that I talked about. This type of speciation, where you have two populations physically separated from each other, is specifically called allopatric speciation. This is different from the other type of speciation, which is sympatric. And sympatric means that there's no physical barrier isolating them. Usually there's something like a genetic barrier or a reproductive barrier that does not have to do with physical separation. And if you're like, I don't know how I can, really remember that, Patrick refers to something like country or homeland. If you speak Spanish, you could think of that as coming from the same word as país. But Patrick, if you're patriotic, you are very, devoted to your country. So Patrick means like country or homeland. Sim means together. So sympatric would mean same country or same land. Allo means different or other. And allopatric means other country, other homeland. So sim means they're together. Allo means they're separated. And then the other possible result is again talking about selection pressures. It's just saying that they would select for different alleles. Remember, again, when you see something in parentheses, the parentheses are optional. That's extra information or extra words that can be part of the answer. And when you see these slashes, those are basically represent or. So it's different environmental conditions or pressures select for different alleles or genotypes or phenotypes. All right, let's go ahead and move on to part C. Go ahead and pause the video so that you can read this. Try to come up with an answer of your own, and then restart it when you're ready for me to go over my answers and then the scoring guide. Okay, so hopefully you've restarted, and we are now predicting the effect of the formation the isthmus had on resource availability. Now, the important thing is that you had animals moving from North America to South America. It does not mention animals moving from South America to North America, and it says they occupy similar niches. So is that going to increase availability for South American species or decrease it? Well, if you have more species moving in, if they have similar niches, they're going to use similar resources. So there's going to be more competition, so there will be less resource availability. So you can say, if you're putting this in a sentence, less resources are available. We don't have to do any explanation here because they're just asking for a prediction. What's going to happen? So if we look at the scoring guide, it just says less resource availability. Anything that implies decreasing is going to be accepted. So now go ahead and pause for a second so you can read part D. Okay, so now you're asked to justify. So you made your prediction in part C, and now you have to back it up. So that is something along the lines of the North American species occupy similar niches and so would use similar resources as the South American species, which would increase competition for the limited resource supply. Now, again, I am giving you the answer that I came up with when I was first reading this before I looked at the scoring guide. So that doesn't mean that this is the only answer. In fact, if we look at the scoring guide, it just says more species would be competing for the same resources, and then it says resulting in fewer resources for each individual. As long as you have something that means the same thing, you would earn the credit. But I do caution you, sometimes they look for very specific terms. So I was not at this AP reading. I was not able to grade these. I graded a different test. So for instance, they could say you need to have the word competing in the answer, or you need to imply that they're going for the same resources. So be as specific as you can during your answer. And like I said, you can also leave some space so you can add extra words, extra clarifying thoughts as you go if you have extra time at the end of the test. All right, that's it for question 4.